Hello there, everybody. Welcome along to EFL Debates. I'm delighted to be joined by football manager Mark Bonner. Mark, thanks so much for talking to us. We really do appreciate your time. Talk to us about the silver lining, I suppose, of a bit of time out of work. Does it allow you to give you a bit of space to rest and refresh, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, nice to be here. A few things really. I think the timing of it meant Christmas, which was super. Not something you normally get to have, or certainly. No, I think back to Christmas days where you have a couple of hours and then your mind's constantly thinking about the game the next day and whatever. So to have that period was really nice. And then you get into the new year. January's fairly dull and boring for everybody, which means, try and get some routine back and get busy. But I've had taken in some brilliant games from all four of the top divisions. Spent time within clubs with other managers and other coaches, and I've got quite a lot of that sort of booked in for the next month. So in terms of an opportunity to recharge and rest, yes, but reflect and learn as well, and get myself prepared for whatever is next and whenever that comes about. But it's a period I'm actually really enjoying. I think the strain of taking a job for 3.5, 4 years is a tough one. Thinking back to that, one of those years was in COVID, which was a very random year in everybody's lives that went to the very last day of the season, as did the Great Escape to the very last day of the season. And obviously, when it goes to the last day, that can eat right into your off-season period as well, which makes you turn around even smaller. So, yeah, it was a really tough period of time and a long period of time. But I certainly had the energy to continue doing it. But only then, when you stop, do you realise, okay, yeah, I was fairly tired there. So it's been nice to have a break. I'm enjoying it and looking forward to seeing whatever comes next.
Which games have you been able to see?
Cool. Well, I mean, I've been to 2 Arsenal games, 2 Brighton games, 2 West Ham games, 2 Southampton games. I've seen Norwich. I've seen Swansea. I've seen MK Dons and Crawley. I've seen, so I've seen a couple of League Two, a couple of League One. I've seen 2 or 3 in every division so far, which has been brilliant actually throughout all the leagues, and seeing just enjoying football as a supporter and watching it a little bit with a tactical eye and a little bit with have a couple of beers and watch the game type thing. And it's been great.
Lovely stuff. I want to take it back to what makes what from your sort of experiences and maybe early life do we as sort of observers need to understand in order to understand how your mind works and what makes you tick as a manager?
Blimey, I don't know. I guess that every individual is very different there. What makes me tick is an interesting question. I absolutely love working in teams, and I absolutely love serving or doing for other people. I also have a relentless work ethic, which I really think is important. And ultimately, you go through lots of these periods and you think about what are your key values and things all the time. And all the courses that you do, they lead you towards understanding yourself before you can then understand others and things. And I like those reflective tasks. And ultimately, I think the values that I would say are my biggest ones is hard work with others, so teamwork, for others, so serving people and doing for others, to make a difference. And whatever that difference might be, it could be big or small, but ultimately, I think any football club I go into, the job of the coach is to make a difference. Now, obviously, that's winning games, and that makes a difference. And there are other things that can contribute to that as well. I think they're the things that really drive me more than anything, and are the things that probably shape the way I work and treat people and think about everything, really.
Who on your journey do you think has inspired you to kind of have that mindset, or do you think it's something that's sort of innately within you?
Yeah, I think there's a fair innate thing about that, and I think you definitely learn from other people. I certainly learned from so many people, so many experiences. I wouldn't ever say there's one person that has been that. I've had some brilliant colleagues. I've worked for some brilliant leaders. And I have seen or been taught by some excellent ones as well. And I think I've stolen off of all of those the best traits, I think. But you can anything you take from anyone else, you have to be authentic. So you have to implement those qualities in your own way. And that is probably the hardest task, just to try and really understand, now, this is what I believe in, and I'm not going to budge from that, versus understanding when you need to change because the circumstances dictate it. But fundamentally, I think, like a football team needs a set of principles to fall back on, everybody needs a set of values that you're not going to negotiate with. And I think that's a key part of your armoury.
Absolutely. And I suppose that part of your armoury helped you kind of work your way through Cambridge United, which kind of leads me on to my next question, which is how can maybe coaches watching this who are already working at a club sort of work their way through? Because if I think I'm right in thinking you started out at Cambridge in a non-coaching role even?
I started in a community coaching role, so I've worked through every sort of level really within the club, and I think it shows that it's possible. I actually think it's more possible now than ever in some ways, because I think there's a lot more club models, a lot more sporting directors, a lot more clubs developing their own DNA and understanding what their club is, and therefore, if you are in situ in a club, if you really get your teeth into understanding what that DNA is, how the club operates, what the aspirations are. It's something I think you could probably work your way through. Now, landing the end job of working in the first team is sometimes a bit of luck, sometimes just timing. Sometimes it's just sticking it out and staying the course, and eventually you'll be the one that's left, so you'll get the job. I think that's just the reality of it. And my advice to people would be, and this is really contradictory, but I say it all the time. I think if I think about myself now, on one side of the coin, you've got to go fast and hard. You've got to work. You've got to have nothing else that gets in the way. You can have things that assist you and make you better, and you've got a scale from work. But it's got to be, you're either doing it or you're not, and you've got to be 100% for it. And then at the same time, there's the element of slowing down and giving yourself time and space to think and reflect and learn off of other people, and not become part of an echo chamber or thinking that this way is the only way. And it's finding that sweet spot and balance between those. But I do think the way clubs are setting themselves up, I don't think, when I was appointed, and similar time Liam Manning was appointed, that was probably the first, at the time, youngest ones doing it, and it wasn't happening so much. And now you look across the last couple of years, and either internal appointments, first-time opportunities, or younger coaches are getting opportunities probably more than ever before. The statistics for first-time managers are pretty bleak. 60% don't get a second job. So therefore, it makes it, you've got to make sure that you're ready as best you can, and you don't really know until you do it. So that is, I think, the biggest challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that point of being ready, you had those games in your first stint as caretaker manager at Cambridge against Tranmere and Yeovil in December 2018. So I'm wondering, were you more or less confident for your second caretaker stint as a result of those games?
Definitely more. I mean, I loved that period. It was proper. We had coach educators. I was working in the academy manager, first team coach. I sort of had 3 jobs really at the time. And I was look after the team for 3 games. I was assistant to Joe as well for a period of time. Joe Dunn, Joe left. Colin Calderwood was coming in, but I knew I wasn't going to be doing the job. But I had sort of 3 games to look after the team. And the coach educator who I was working with for the academy before stepping up permanently with Joe was in with the youth team coach that day. And he watched my session and said, like, how are you finding it? I said, this is the best course I've ever been on. And it was. I did 2 weeks of taking the job. It was the best CPD anyone could ever do. And it made me think, I really fancy this somewhere in the future, but I definitely don't want it now. So that was good for me. And the next time around that opportunity came, I felt I was much better prepared for it, and wiser, having worked with other people and done it for longer and had that experience. And the second time around that it came, it was something I embraced and really enjoyed.
Yeah, it is funny. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that you. First of all, I think it's great that you kind of had the sort of the self-awareness to know that you weren't quite ready the first time round. But the second time round, you won. I think you won your first 4 games as caretaker, and I must admit that at the time, as a neutral observer from a sort of neutral position, I'd seen Cambridge United maybe give a previous manager the job off the back of a strong caretaker stint. So I thought, yeah, is this the right move? But you did a great job in the second time around. So I suppose it shows how that bit of extra time really made a difference.
Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of this. We all just make assumptions that because something happened once, it can happen again, or it can't. Or do you know what I mean? It's just no two situations are ever the same. And quite often we're all guilty of, when we watch a club or watch a team, we make big judgments off of a minuscule amount of information compared to the people that are in it every day. And so that might be right, by the way, but also it might not be. And sometimes we in our industry or in our jobs can't defend ourselves, and we just have to crack on and get on with it. And that's just how it works. So I do think we have to be mindful of that sometimes, that it's never the same in any period of time. But I think also you can probably see and tell the difference between what's the bounce of just change, someone different voice, couple of quick results, and what's the difference between something that's just completely different and looks like it and feels like it can be sustainable and is going to go in a different direction. And I would like to think, looking back at that period, certainly for those internally, that they could see and understand that. I mean, one of the things I did during that period, I took 7 games, won 4, drew 1, lost 2. And one of the things I did was record all of my team meetings, team briefings, game plan meetings to the players and sent it to the owners and the board of directors. So they went into every game knowing what the team was, how we were planning to play the game, the opposition analysis that we'd done. One, because it was like the only opportunity other than match days that you could show them your work, because they wouldn't be in the building every day. And 2, because they'll watch the game a little bit more through my eyes and see the game in the way that I wanted it to look. And I think that really helped shape their opinion, and that created a real trust amongst people, and something I continued to the day I left.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's certainly a learning curve from my point of view, because I don't always call it correctly from the outside, and you want to try and make the observations that you do with as much information as possible, really.
Yeah, but I wouldn't beat yourself up for that, because it is impossible to make the right call. Nobody does, and actually sometimes it's just opinion. And we're allowed to disagree. And actually, in the modern world, even though it tells you you're not allowed to, you're allowed to make mistakes, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and then say, got that wrong, be forgiven, move on. Now, people don't let you do that anymore, but it's a shame. But in the end, like, you're allowed an opinion, and you can get it wrong. And actually, people should be respected more for saying, I got that wrong, rather than battered for doing it, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think society would be a lot better if there was a little bit more of that. 100% with you on that one. I want to ask you, summer 2020 was obviously a great summer for Cambridge United in terms of recruitment. What's the obviously you had support in that area with Ben Strang and co. What is the Mark Bonner blueprint for really top draw recruitment?
Well, I think the blueprint for anything that I would have to do within a football club is, what is the best way for this club, what is possible, what is the maximum we can eke out of what we've got. I think that's it. You can have you can sit in my position now and create a lovely document that says all the things you're going to do, and then when you walk into a football club, like, half of it might not be possible, or the situation might be the wrong time to do it, or the context of where and how and when you get the job or what you have at your disposal can be completely different. And so therefore, I think the job of a coach, quite simply, is get the best out of what you've got. And therefore, that can guide everything else. In terms of our recruitment, and particularly that summer, it was that summer and the one after were our best 2. I think there was a few reasons. One, a significant drop in wages because of the pandemic. In year 1, a salary cap almost because of the COVID rules, and that really helped us be more competitive. You know, we had the 21st fourth bottom budget in that league and finished second, but the distance between the bottom and the top was a lot tighter. It was still like fairly significantly bigger at the top than it was where we were. But it's no surprise that ourselves, Cheltenham and Morecambe, got promoted that season, all in the bottom 4 of budgets, 3 of us.
Oh, I hadn't put that made that connection. Wow, that's
yeah,
incredible, really.
And don't worry, we had certainly a lot less than other people, but we overachieved and got the most out of what we had. So I think that those 2 years really helped from a financial standpoint, being more competitive. I also think that in that year particularly, we had a long time to do it. We had 6 months to recruit a squad, which is very, very unique and unheard of. Whereas in 2 of the other seasons, we didn't know what league we were in until the last kick of the last day of the season. And that can have quite a big impact into how you then go next and whether you're ahead of the curve or not. And then starting with the end in mind is the big thing. What team do we want? How do we need to get towards that? What players do we need, or type of players do we need in certain positions? And that's one question. And the second one is, which ones can we actually get? Because the reality is, you don't usually get the ones at the top of your list. You can start the window with a list of players, and then actually you don't usually get the top ones when you're in a smaller club. So it's trying to make the best of the players that you can get, and you do get. But certainly in that year, myself, Ben, Keith Burt at the time, Chief Scout, we spent hours on the phone together in lockdown trying to work out what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And the board of directors allowed us to sign players really early when we didn't even know when the season was starting or whether there would be crowds in the ground. And had we not done that, we'd have been scratching around a little bit. So I think that helped us bed a squad in and start working with them really quickly. But it also helped those players, because it was like, otherwise they would be waiting. And that's why they signed early, because it was like, right, I've guaranteed myself a job there for a year. I'll sign a year's contract in a lot of cases and see where the world is in a year's time. But it worked for us, and we made it work really well.
Absolutely, yeah, and well done to the board for sort of offering you that support. I think one of the sort of key components of the 2021 season for Cambridge was the form of Paul Mullin, because previously I would have maybe referred to him as maybe a single-digit forward that's got a great work ethic and a really good spring on him, and then something happened at Cambridge where he just became this prolific goal-scoring machine. And I'm wondering, how much do you put it down to the influence of Wes Houlihan and that creativity he brought, and how much would you say was it down to Joe Ironside doing a lot of the grafting and the legwork to maybe free Mullin up a little bit?
I think there's loads of contributing factors, but I also think it's great because football's unpredictable in some cases. And there isn't a rule, and it's not going to be the same one place to another, which is why otherwise everyone would do it. So that's I think the beauty of it. Paul's case, he came in on loan towards the end of the last season. We struck up a really good relationship, felt like we could get the best out of each other. He hadn't played much in a front two. He hadn't played significant runs of games for a while, or hadn't played in the front two for a while. We felt that he would be able to be the type that could score goals with the way we were going to play and cause problems. Certainly when we knew we were going to pair him with Joe Ironside, who did an amazing job, never really got the headlines that year because of the other two, but he was incredible for that team, and a real warrior, and scored goals and contributed brilliant performances to the team. That enabled Moles to have more space to work in and really occupy defending players, and we had a magician behind them that could just make the game look easy and make everybody look better. And I say this all the time, I don't think we'd have got promoted without Wes. I mean, I don't know how I even define whether that is real and right or not. I have no idea, but he was the best player I've ever seen play for Cambridge United, and there's been people watching longer than me, so I'm sure there's others to argue it. It was a shame supporters didn't get to see him live that year, but he was great for us, and the three of them were superb. So I think playing in a front two was great for Moles, playing regularly with players that could help him and create chances for him. And then the rest of the team were incredible in terms of their consistency, work ethic, organisation, structure, ability to get the ball to certain places that could hurt them and in certain situations. And the team had a really good spirit and a great environment that we worked in a tough year. So I never think it's one thing. I think it's probably a sum of all those parts that led to him having a pretty remarkable season.
I'm glad you mentioned Wes Houlihan there, Mark, because it's one thing. Houlihan's an absolute genius on a football pitch, no question about that. I also think that you might not have won promotion had you not managed him correctly, because you had a policy of only starting him on Saturdays and never playing him midweek games. And I think that's you get some players in League Two that have got absolutely brilliant ability, but you've got to manage them correctly. I would say Johnny Williams at other clubs is probably a similar example. But Wes Houlihan, that dynamic of managing him correctly, and maybe the age dynamic, although I suppose that maybe that's more of a media thing than necessarily the situation as it was for you and Wes.
Yeah, I mean, he was the fittest lad when we trained and did running and things like that, and he just wants to play football every day. Like, his desire to play was great. He was such an infectious personality. If your best players and your superstars are your hardest working and your most humble, it really does help set a culture in a team. So we owe a lot to him for that. I owe a lot to that whole group who were amazing for me and really bought into what we were trying to do that year. And we all had a really successful time together. But he was someone that we tried to use more often in the early part of the season, but actually we found we'd probably get our best from him if we just used him in certain games. And you know, the importance of him to the team for a period became that we would win on Saturdays and we couldn't win on a Tuesday when he wasn't there. And we began to change that dynamic and chip away at getting points in important results on Tuesdays without him. And we won a couple of really big games. I remember one at Southend where Jack Iredale scored an absolute belter, and another brilliant player for us. And I do think that he played a major role in that, and how we managed him was good. And then you have to also accept that if you've got the right environment and you've got a player like that, everybody else in the team has to accept he might get treated a bit differently, and there will be days where he might not be in and might not train when the others were grafting. But everybody understood that would get the best out of him to help us win a game, and that's what we all wanted to do. But as well as him, you have to credit the players that created the environment and showed them what Cambridge United was about. Lots of new players came, Digby, another one, Kyle Noyle was in situ. But then the ones that have been around the club a long time, even Dimi Mitoff, but Greg Taylor, who played every game that season as captain and was immense for us at centre-half, Harrison Dunk, Liam O'Neill, these boys are the culture of your club and build connections. And one of the biggest things that in that first summer, I think over the previous 7 seasons, there'd been over 170 players represent the first team. And in my mind, it was way too many. And how could our supporters build any connections with a team and players with a turnaround so fast? So we need some stability and consistency to build a culture and to build a way. You've got to start somewhere to do that. And that consistency was important. And those real calm, high caliber characters made a big, big difference to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Digby, I feel I'm a massive fan of, just because of the way he breaks up play and he just gets around the pitch so much. I mean, those sorts of people. We've talked on this podcast before about creating a culture. Like, how important are people like that to setting the tone in the dressing room and on the training pitch?
Absolutely, yeah. And you strike it lucky sometimes. Every single year there is a churn and change of players. However well or badly you do, there is always a turn of players because people leave or you decide to make changes and you try and improve. So the dynamic shifts all the time. And building a good culture and building a good group is really, really difficult, really tough. And a lot of work has to go into that. But if you can get it right, and we had that for different periods throughout the last 4 years, it can make such a difference. It's definitely something that can add points to your tally at the end of the season. And quite often in that season, we'd win games that would maybe surprise people or that were a bit of an anomaly compared to the statistics of the game. But there was no statistic to measure our spirit and our character and our culture and our mood and our confidence. And it's a human sport. And if you can build those things into your game and make that your superpower, which was one of ours, along with the match-winning players that we had, I think it's really powerful. And we certainly got the best from that season and from those players. And we all had a story to tell, that we were all the probably unpopular or unlikable or doubted people that were given jobs or clubs that no one thought was any good. And that was a great start point for us all to say, well, we think we're this, we're going to prove ourselves right and see what we can do. And we definitely achieved the maximum out of ourselves that year.
Certainly did. I wanted to move it to the squeaky bum time, if you like, because you lost a couple of the games before the end of the season, and I quite vividly remember the 5-4 loss at Harrogate. You went on quest that evening, and I would have thought, if I'm a manager, I would love to go on quest, having won promotion, nice and easy, nice and relaxed evening. But I kind of really admired that you had the being a man of your word to actually continue to go on quest even when promotion was in the balance and you'd have to do it against Grimsby on the final day. That was a tough moment, I imagine.
Yeah, so we played on the Friday and I spent the whole day on the Saturday at Quest. And actually on that day, Walsall played Morecambe, and had Walsall won the game, we'd have got promoted anyway. But Morecambe won the game. So I was glued to that game that afternoon. All the producers, Ali Maxwell was there that day, and Dean Ashton and Michelle Owen. I think they were quite surprised to see me walk in the studio in the morning, because they were they didn't think I'd make it. But if you say you're going to do something, you got to do it, however uncomfortable it might be. Really random game. We arrived late, all sorts of problems, and threw us. They completely changed their team with the FA Trophy game the following week from the previous season, and really, really random. Still can't explain it now. I think it just sums football up sometimes. I think what it does show is we were a team that was very consistent, very calm, really good emotional intelligence to keep ourselves on an even keel when things were going well or not so well. And then a game like that just appears from nowhere and is really random. And the week before, we'd lost to Stevenage, and then the pressure was building of, we know we needed probably a point from our last 3 games, and we didn't win the game at Stevenage, and it was like, okay, we've only got 2 now, and the doubt creeps in, and random things happen. And certainly that week going into Grimsby afterwards, having played on the Friday, it was a long, long time until that Grimsby game came around, then that last week. And it was a built up of pressure, thinking, I guess the idea of we've been great this season, surely we're not going to throw it away, and trying to manage that was some challenge for sure.
Yeah, talk us through that Grimsby game, then the final day, and I suppose the celebrations afterwards.
Yeah, well, it was a tough day for them because they'd been relegated from the league. So for us, it was like we've just got to go and do our job as best we can in that situation. We'd learned a lot of lessons from the Stevenage game, where there was way too much for just over the top around that game in terms of club preparing for what might happen afterwards if we win the game, and it was all nonsense, really. Too much hype on social media, all those things, too much of us all getting hundreds of messages of support, but it just builds this whole picture in your mind. So I tried to ban everyone from using social media the next week. I don't know if anyone did, but I did. But I said to the club, we're going to spend this week as if we haven't got a game. No press requests, no players doing press. Like, people won't even know there's a game happening if we can make it like that. Brilliant.
You didn't do an interview before.
I did my normal pre-match game, but I didn't let any players. And we tried to tone it right down. As little activity online as possible. Don't build the thing up. Make sure that all the roads into the ground are blocked, so fans can't be there cheering us in with fireworks like they were for the Stevenage game. All great things, by the way. All great things and really supportive, but actually had a negative effect on us. And talking about how we might celebrate if we go up. Those conversations were around in the club, and you just think, no, this is nonsense. We need to concentrate on winning the game. So we took all of that away. It made a real focus of just do the business. And it's a tough game, but we managed to score in the first half, which really relaxed everybody, and went on from there. And some big decisions to make that day and pick the team. I remember the game as Hiram Boateng was outstanding for us in that season. He got a big injury, dislocated his shoulder and was missing for a while, but he was great for us. And I didn't play him in that last game. I put Liam O'Neill in the team. It was just a gut that something might work, and I wanted a really, really calm game, really consistent. I felt Liam could help us in that. He scored the first goal. And actually, I didn't make one change in that game. We're 3-0 up with 15 minutes to go. There's people saying, why don't we put so-and-so on? And I think, we don't need to do anything in this game. And every lad on the bench is sat there with their head down thinking, I don't need to come on here. Let's just get across the line here. So it was a horrible day in lots of ways. But once it ended, it was, epic scenes that I don't think will ever be repeated because of the time it was, and some amazing imagery that is going around from that period of time where we were on top of the turnstiles celebrating with the fans who were locked out the ground and things like that. It's just that will never happen again. So really unique period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. What a wonderful achievement that was. I'm glad you mentioned Hiram Boateng, because it sort of takes me onto a theme that I'm quite curious about. Liam O'Neill, I think, got injured quite early on in that season, and he came into midfield. And then Harry Darling got poached by MK Dons, and then he brought in Declan Drysdale, I think. And then I suppose we can come on to talk about Paul Mullin leaving, but that sort of theme of replacing a really important player, that's a massive part of management, I think, because you can have the best laid plan in the world, but then when something happens that disrupts that plan, you've then got to come up with something else.
Yeah, and it's probably different depending on the time. And if it happens at the end of a season, you've got longer to try and do something about it. The reality is, if you live with limited resources or at the lower end of a league, you lose a top player, you're probably not replacing them. You're probably not going to get someone as good or better than them. And certainly if you lose people on money that is a little bit lower and they go and earn double, treble somewhere else, all of a sudden to try and replace that person for the lower amount of money is really, really challenging. So I think that's hard. I think in the January, it's a little bit different. Some of it can be planned. I mean, one of the big things I'd say about that season is one of the strengths of that team was just our resilience to deal with whatever came our way. I think we had 9 centre-back pairings during that season. Greg played with about 8 different central defenders, whether they were loans or permanent ones. And, in the January transfer window, Harry Darling got sold to MK Dons, which was a good deal for the club. And we expected that it would be Robbie Cundy, Greg Taylor at centre-half, and Robbie got recalled on his loan 2 days after Harry as well. And we didn't see that one coming, and that wasn't in the plan. But then he got a League One loan afterwards. So all of a sudden, we've lost 2 really important players in that position. But what we had was an amazing ability to just go, whatever happens, we're going to find a way of getting through it. And we did it constantly, whether it was injuries, players leaving in the January transfer window, having to play players out of position. The reason why I love the group of players so much is they just got on with whatever came our way. And came out on top in so many of those situations, had an unbelievable resilience to deal with that, incredible resilience to go to the end of games. We won so many games late on, which you often see in promotion teams. And there was a real special momentum about that team.
Certainly was, yeah, absolutely. I do want to take it on to Paul Mullen's exit for Wrexham, because listen, you can't blame Miles, because the offer I'm sure he received was fantastic, but it did bring a fresh challenge coming into League One. And again, I think a lot of people, not the top 20, had this view. I probably had this view that as much as I completely, back up what you're saying about the spirit of that Cambridge team, it was a very clinical side, and Paul Mullen was a huge part of that. So to replace somewhat, your main talisman, I thought would be a massive challenge. But you went, I think I'm right in saying, to a one up top formation predominantly in League One rather than two up top, and you seem to find the answers to adversity.
Oh yeah, you have to find a way and adapt, don't you? I mean, one of the best ways to protect a win rate, a win percentage, or be in a high scoring team or winning every week is don't get promoted, because it's going to be a much bigger task at the next level. And I think there was a huge difference in that season from the League Two to League One. I think League One's more open this year than it has been in the previous couple of years, for sure. And League Two's a monster of a league this year, and I think that just changes. And the Championship is incredible this year, and maybe next year League One will be really strong again if you look at the current trend of who's the ups and downs could be. So I think that cycle happens quite a bit, but in the end you have to adapt to the next level. And I think the obvious things that we thought when we were going up a level was, number one, and this is the starting point, we're not going to score as many goals. It's just fact. So straight away you're on a downer, because you just know you're not going to score as many goals. And then in order to be competitive in games, we felt it was going to be really difficult for us to play with two strikers in the league without changing to a back three. And we didn't want to do that with the players that we had and the organisation structure that we built. We got really familiar in a certain way, so we didn't want to rip everything up. So the easiest way was to drop a forward down and add a little bit more security in midfield. And that leads itself to thinking, right, there might be games where we're having less of the ball than we had, and therefore counter-attacking becomes really important. So the recruitment and retention of fast players in attacking positions in wide areas particularly going to be key for us. And almost like the model and the development of that team was just by a consequence of the league we were playing in. Had we not got promoted, we probably would have looked a different kind of team in the following season and evolved in a different way. So it's just, I think that little bit of, you can have an idea of what you'd love your team to look like, but you find a way of getting the best out of the players you've got and your best chance of winning. And I think that was certainly our one. And as often you see with teams that get promoted, you have a real bounce and a momentum about the season. We certainly went into that one. Everyone, or most of the squad and most of the coaching staff, haven't played at the level or been at the level. So there was a real excitement about going to a lot of the clubs that we were playing against, hosting a lot of those teams. And with the backdrop of supporters back in the stadiums, it was going to be a really exciting season. And I think we went into it with incredible optimism and positivity and confidence, alongside the story that we were going to finish bottom. That was an expectation. And actually, when that's the outcome, it's really easy to just become an underdog and use that as your tag. And we decided that year we wanted to be a confident underdog, and we wanted to believe that we could do what we wanted to, but we wanted to embrace the tag of underdog. And it was certainly easy to do that. It's harder to maintain that tag the longer you go on. You need to evolve beyond that, but it certainly was something we used for our advantage that year.
Yeah, you used the word underdog, and I suppose this brings me on to the sort of, some might call it the Mark Bonner catchphrase, which is, we'll go and attack these games. I don't hear any other managers use that phrase, but I think it's quite an interesting one in terms of, it's not, we'll just get ready for those games. It's, no, we're going to attack those games, which I suppose captures the sort of mindset, I suppose, that you wanted to create.
Yeah, language is important and words are important, and you can create narrative from what the words that you use. Sometimes you'd say that and then you wouldn't have the ball for 90 minutes, so it didn't necessarily look like much of an attack of a performance. The intention is always to do it, and it doesn't define how often you're going to try and attack it. And certain games we spent large periods without the ball, and we had to really grit to get results. But that is a quality as well. Defending brilliantly, defending your box, having incredible organisation and spirit to stop crosses, keep clean sheets, defend your goal for your lives. Those are really strong qualities that you want in a team. Incredible resilience or recovery speed to get back behind the ball or to regain the ball quickly. All of those out of possession qualities are really important ones, and we certainly used them well. And then the mindset of just trying to make sure we were in a position where we could really go for a team was important. And anytime we had our full deck of players in good health going at it, we were a match for most teams in most days.
Certainly were, including Bolton and Portsmouth. Do you think a couple of those wins against the big clubs in League One gave you a bit of belief early on?
Yeah, probably. And it was an exciting thing that, our home record's been outstanding for the last sort of 4 years, really. And it was something we were really big on. And we did some work around the stadium to make it a better place for the players on match day. We did some work in the dressing rooms. We did some work on the playing surface. We tried to make the environment something that was going to go in our favour. And as time's gone on, the crowds have increased and improved, and it feels quite tight there, and the atmospheres have got better and better. And since pre-pandemic, we've grown the crowd to record numbers, which has been amazing achievement from everybody to create something that people want to be part of and create that environment, because a home record is always going to be really important to smaller clubs in the leagues, and trying to evolve beyond the smaller club mentality is the task, but it has to be done in line with the resources and everything else. It can't just be a whim of, we want to be this, but we haven't got the resources to become that. I think there's a big difference between the two levels, or there has been. And this year, I think the top of League Two and the bottom of League One are a little bit closer. So it's a really open league that you can probably finish in the middle of this year for a team like Cambridge. And you look how close that is at the moment. It's there to be done. But home record has always been important. And in the last few years, a lot of the wins have come there. And it's finding the solutions and ways of being a team that picks up more points away from home that is going to be really key.
Well, you talk about owning it at the Abbey. You're also owned the Abbey in your stint as Cambridge United manager. How sort of proud were you to be part of Cambridge United as a club that brought their ground back, which is so important to the identity of the football club and the feeling like, we own our home.
Yeah, look, I don't take any credit for that. That's the millions of the owners that have done that. I think the club's in the best position it's ever been that I've known. Incredibly stable financially, incredibly ambitious owners that want to keep improving things. But through decades of zero investment or just getting by, every single area of that football club has demanded investment, and that creates a huge challenge to try and do everything together. So the progress we've made has been in an amazing period. And I think in smaller clubs, the reason why you have eras, like you have so many bad days, games, seasons, it's tough sometimes, it's a bit of a grind. And then these periods come along where lots goes well. And that's why it gets remembered. And whether that's on the pitch or off the pitch, I don't think it's a coincidence that lots of those things have happened at the same time, because if you have ambition and you have resource and you have like-minded people that have got the club's best interests at heart before anything else, you can make amazing progress. And no one would have predicted pre-pandemic that Cambridge United would be in the position and the situation it is now. And there's no reason for it to stop. I don't think that the progress is going to stop there. It's certainly not the end of the cycle or the end of the development and improvement. And that's why I'm disappointed not to be there, because I think I could have played a major part in continuing that. But it goes down to somebody else and the next people to do it, knowing that what they're inheriting and working with is miles better than at any period when I was there. So I'm pleased to have played a part in that. But I think the progress of the club can be huge. And buying back the stadium was a moment of real pride for supporters. And as at my core, a supporter of the club, that was a really special moment, because it meant the club's got a real chance of making the next big steps over the coming probably decade.
Talking of moments of pride, winning at Newcastle was probably a glorious moment for Cambridge United, and maybe the moment of the 21-22 season, seeing as you'd sort of established the likelihood of safety pretty early on, to the point that it wasn't really from an outside point of view, it wasn't really a question mark. But winning a Newcastle just must be a wonderful moment, going to such a grand stadium and getting that result. Just talk us through that day.
I think the timing of the game was really good. They'd only recently been taken over. The atmosphere in the stadiums had changed hugely from being quite toxic to being an unbelievable celebration. I mean, the atmosphere that day was just incredible. I left the dressing room before the players so I could be out in the dugout just to soak that in when they play the music as they come out the tunnel. It was incredible seeing 5,500 Cambridge fans up in the gods, and then the Newcastle fans created such a buzz. It was a brilliant occasion to be a part of, and I think really it's a memory that I think a lot of supporters really reflect on. What a day it was, and it will be remembered forever. And the players are a huge highlight, and hopefully not for them their career highlight. I hope there's better, and likewise for me. So it was a really enjoyable experience. Obviously, on those days, 9 times out of 10, you know which way that game goes. But on any given day, it can happen. You need to have a bit of luck on your side. You need to have incredible performance without the ball. You need people to have amazing games. And there were so many good performances in that game. Dimi Mitov was outstanding and kept an amazing goal. And all those things need to go your way. But that was fundamentally a really, really key result for us. 3 days later, we played Portsmouth at home in the EFL Trophy. We won that game, and following that game, we won 3 league games. It was an amazing January for us. And I think any time that you can get consecutive results in the league, 2 or 3 on the bounce, it can make a significant difference. Now, we were never in the bottom 6 in that season. But in that period, when we won those 3 on the bounce, we'd created a lovely gap to the bottom 4. And at no point in the year was it kind of safe, but by the end of January, you looked and thought we put ourselves in a brilliant position. So not only was it an amazing day for us, but it was a really good springboard for us to create the second half of the season that we had. And certainly a day I don't think anybody will forget in a hurry.
No, absolutely. What a day. I want to take it on to the following summer, Mark, because I think at the time, for me as an outsider, you had 19, I think was the number of players contracted from the previous season for 22-23. And from the outside at the time, I actually saw that as an advantage, in the sense that you had that continuity of the group and giving people that opportunity, and you don't want to sort of rip too much up. Maybe with the benefit of hindsight, do you think that, if you'd had the funds, would you have liked to have maybe freshened the squad up a little bit more that summer than perhaps you were able to?
Well, I don't think anyone would say that they don't want more players and better players. I think everybody would always want for that. We had a really, really strong united together group at that period. I think we were a couple short from being a really strong squad going into it. But I think that's just kind of the reality every year. And the balancing act all the time is trading off the qualities that you've got, the experiences that you've had. Going into the following season, that is going to be a harder season than the first one. And it's very difficult to get better in terms of players. You can easily make decisions in May to remove players and have a plan of what you're going to bring in. And then the reality of transfer windows hits and you can't get most of those players. They've gone somewhere else. So you're always taking that line and that pragmatism towards what's the best thing. And if we're going to have a tough season and it's going to be a big grind for us, which it likely will be, and that's reality. That isn't pessimism. It's just reality of how it usually is. And knowing the level and the league and where we're at, it's probably how it's going to look. It's going to be tough for us at times. You want people you can trust that are going to stick in and have a right go. And so we got in terms of the retention of players, absolutely no problem. But trying to sign more and better players, obviously a real challenge for us. And in terms of the 2 previous windows that I'd spoke about and how strong they were, I think the next 2 were much more difficult. And the financial landscape changed. We were investing more than we ever had, and the owners kept putting more into the budget every year, but so was everybody else. And 1 year out from COVID, the financial landscape started to return back to where it was, and it was at a level that in many cases we couldn't compete for those players that were really better. And I think everybody just thinks different is better, and that isn't always the case. Better's better, and you've got to try and be able to get better. And if you can't, then actually what you know and what you've got going for you as a strength is the thing that you'll probably need to fall back on. And with smaller squads and smaller resources and not so deep in the competitiveness of the squad, you're always relying on the fact that if you get some injuries, you're going to hit some problems. And that certainly hit us last year and probably a bit this year as well.
Do you feel from I did actually watch a few games from that season, Mark, and probably the first half of the season. I actually thought from January, helped by the January recruitment, which we'll come on to, performances had picked up. But from the first half of the season, there were probably 2 or 3 players that I looked at and felt they're a little bit below. I don't quite recognise them from the previous campaign. Do you did you feel that as a manager at all?
I think it's fairly natural in the fact that there's an excitement and anticipation going into season 1 of the new level, that this is all new and everything else. There was definitely a shift in the second season, a little bit towards a bit more, okay, we're confident at the level, and that a little bit of an edge disappeared from some. And then probably also a bit of a mindset shift that, the year we got promoted, most players were on 1-year contracts. And the almost agreed, unsaid mindset was, we're going to do everything we can this year to have a successful year. And then whatever happens at the end happens. But if we do it right and we have a great season, we'll probably all end up okay at the end of it. And maybe then in this season, we're talking about when lots of people were into the final year of their contract, mindset shift slightly and advice shift slightly towards what's next for me rather than what's now for me. Got to be amazing now, and the next will look after itself. And I think that's difficult to deal with sometimes as younger players, because there was huge interest in lots of those players, and it was likely that many of them would leave at the end of that next season. So it was really, really, really tough to try and manage that, and maybe the focus shifted slightly in that sense. We started the season brilliantly, as we have in all 4 seasons. And actually in that season and this one, we've really come off and fallen. And I think that's down to when you haven't got depth of squad to either cope with injuries or to keep people on their toes and remain really competitive, because you just someone needs to come out the team for a game and then go back in. When you haven't got that ability to do that and stay strong and a team that can win, it's very difficult. And then bad runs can develop quite quickly. In the season we're talking about, we started great. We were really near the top in the playoff positions going into a certain period of it. And I hate league tables early in the season because they just make a rod for your own back, really.
I know, yeah.
And I remember saying publicly in an interview, okay, you're really happy. Let's see where we are in a month's time. And the next 5 games were against teams you expect to get promoted. We lost 5 in a row. And it was really, really tough for us. And one of them, actually, Bristol Rovers away, we expected to do better on, but we had a tough day and things just snowballed. But you can lose games. You can lose games against teams that are better than you. And what you realise very quickly is 3 games is a crisis in football. 2 is like really close to a crisis, and therefore trying to manage that as well is a really interesting challenge. But it was certainly a brutal winter, and we picked up some big injuries quite early, a long way from the transfer window. And it became a really tough shift for us to try and stick with it. But when we got to January, we were able to develop or change the squad around a little bit. It then took a bit of time to get it right, but we got there in the end.
What's your advice for managers in a similar situation where you're managing a club, especially in light of a really good first season at a level, but resources are limited and you've not got a lot of depth? How do you sort of create that freshness? Because it's such a tough balancing act, isn't it? Because like you say, you want to try and bring better quality into the group, but the resources aren't always there, and sometimes that can be a problem. What would you say to managers in that sort of situation?
I mean, sometimes the resources aren't there. Sometimes they are there, but you just can't get the players that you want, and so on. And I think that's just the reality of transfer windows are so hard. I mean, look at this one; it's so slow, and certainly top level, there's very little happening, and that has a spin off to everywhere else. I think the finances are drying up a little bit in the top level at the minute, and everything else, and that has a consequence throughout the whole thing. I think, how do you create change? Well, one is just changing players and changing people, or sometimes it's changing managers. That's creating change and getting a reaction. It's human. Then you get the change some players, which your transfer window allowed us to do, or change the shape and style of the game. I mean, that's always a risky one as a coach. If you change the shape of your team and it works, happy days. If you change it, you're in risk of people saying, he's lost the plot, he doesn't know what he's doing, blah, blah, blah. And if you change it and it doesn't work, then everything's a disaster. So, like, in the end, the only advice I ever sort of give to anyone, and I'm nobody to give advice to people that have done it a lot longer than me, but you're only right if you win. And you have to get really comfortable really quickly with that is the perception. And you can know you've done so many things right, but for one reason or another, someone makes a mistake, something random happens, and you lose the game, and it's your fault, and that's how it is. Or that is just the way it goes. You don't complain about it. It's just getting used to that. And then in the beginning, I didn't know that, and then the longer you do the job, you sort of go, okay, I see how it is. So just actually block everything out, do what you think's right, and then in the end, you hope that comes right for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Just being able to accept those terms, I think context and nuance can definitely get lost in football sometimes because it is such an emotive sport. But I wanted to come on to that January window because you recalled Liam Bennett, who was having a fantastic loan at Walsall. You brought in Ryan Bennett and Michael Morrison, lots of experience in defence, and then you brought in Conor McGrandles, who had been part of a League One playoff finalist side with Lincoln City 2 seasons before, I think. Just talk to us about the impact those lot made.
Yeah, obviously it was clear for a while that we needed to add, and the owners were great in investing in the squad at that point, and it gave us in the second half of the season, certainly towards the back end when everybody was fit, we had a really strong squad to pick from. It's no coincidence that we made more changes in games, made more subs in games. We had more of a competitive squad. When we had that, we got results. It was a fairly, I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it is a fairly quick route to having some success. If you've got a really strong squad and good depth in the squad and availability, then it gives you a much, much better chance. And that certainly was where we ended up later on in the season. Going into that, we had some good investment. We went for some experience defensively. We felt we needed to add a little bit to help us there because we were looking a bit vulnerable in defending areas. We signed Ryan Bennett, but it probably needed 3 or 4 weeks for him to get fit because he hadn't been anywhere that season. We were after Michael Morrison. It took the whole of the month. We thought we had him at the very beginning of Jan. We didn't actually get him to the end. So that was a few games went by before we managed to do that. Conor McGrandles, outstanding for us. Wish we could have kept him. Really wanted to, but we couldn't. But brilliant, did a great job for us. George Thomas we added in that window as well, and then he got injured during the first month, rolled his ankle in training. At the same time, Fajiri Okunabiri, Harvey Nibbs got injured that month. So we were like, players were dropping like flies. And so we made really good additions, I felt, to the squad and became much, much stronger as a unit because of that. And it took some time. And in that period, we changed the shape of the team as well. You know, we had Ryan Bennett, Michael Morrison, Lloyd Jones as 3 centre-halves that we thought could be a real good foil for us. And for a period of games, I think we won 1 in 10 in that period of time playing that shape. And actually, we were so close in so many games. We were good.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I remember watching the Fleetwood game where you had second half 3 gilt-edged chances, and then they scored their 1. And I think you could see from that, I'm sure there were a few others as well, where you could see you were so close.
Yeah, and it's one of them. It was definitely the right thing to do to change the shape, and we came so close in a number of games. And had early on, we got a bit more of a positive result. We got a point at Lincoln, and had we got a couple more or a win early in that, I think it could have been a huge game changer for us that we've made the big changes and we're off. And then that went on longer, and whatever happened in games, we were so close, but we just couldn't get the ball in, or we couldn't, and we just lost a few games in that period. And then it became, well, the shape doesn't work, and it sort of does, but we just haven't found the right little extra bit. And then, so then you make the decision I made the decision, stay with that. That's going to pay off for us. Mm-hmm. And actually, we played at Charlton first half at the Abbey, and we were playing that shape. And at halftime, it wasn't working. Actually, that game needed the opposite shape and play a 4-2-3-1. So we changed it at halftime. We were very, very good second half. And it played into the narrative, actually, that shape was the problem. So then you got that decision as a coach, right? Well, it wasn't the problem for 9 games. It was in that 45 minutes. And now we changed it so it worked in the second half. But it doesn't mean don't play that next time. But because the narrative was so strong, and even the players started to believe, look how much better we were when we played our normal shape. Then you just go, well, let's just do it. And then we did it, and we won the next game. Now, that isn't simply because of the shape, because remember, this is the shape that lost us a heck of a lot of games before Christmas. So it's just constantly managing that dynamic and making decisions at the right time. And you need the odd moment to go your way. But once we then got the next result, we were off and running, and we had a really strong squad that finished the season brilliantly.
Yeah, I think I imagine I've never been a manager, so I can't talk with any sort of first-hand experience, but I think the more you can sort of switch off from the noise, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, because obviously fans are going to have opinions, but you've kind of just got to focus on what you think is right, really, and that sometimes that can be hard, because what people think can become quite a big influence. But I suppose this feeds into my next question, which is, I think performances had lifted up from January, but the results didn't turn until April, which naturally means there's 2 months where you were playing well, like you mentioned, where you didn't quite get the results. But what I really admired about your leadership in that time was that you managed to stay calm and stay authentic to yourself, even in those moments of real pressure where the club's third tier status was under threat, and obviously it's a really difficult time for everyone. Was that a difficult thing to sort of stay true to yourself in that period?
Not really. I mean, publicly and with the players, I just think, like, you can only be you, can't you? And that is kind of my natural personality. So, but you also have the burden of knowing, right, what is going to help most now. And sometimes it's a rocket, or sometimes people need different things and different behaviours, and you have to play probably different roles as a manager. But I think in the end, I had a genuine confidence that if we got a result, we could snowball and get going. So when you've got conviction that you believe in your team and your players, it makes a heck of a difference. I spent a few days last week at Southampton with Russell Martin. Now, there's a guy who's brilliant, by the way, but also has incredible conviction that this is how we do it, and I'm so confident in it, and it really rubs off on people. And I think going into that period, that's where I was really. I thought, we're so close here to getting the result, and this isn't over. And so therefore, yeah, we talk about knocking out the noise there. I'm with you as well. That's never that can sound really disrespectful, but of course there's noise. You want noise. You don't want empty stadiums like we did for a year. You should have an opinions, and you want to have them, and that creates this whole community and joy about what live sport is. You just don't need to be in that community when you're in this job. It's not. That's not the world you should be living in. Like, you need to be living around the very small people, the group of people that know what's happening day to day, and you make the decisions that you think are the best ones. That's simple, but the two worlds can live at the same time. You just don't need to live in that world. That's I think really important. But for us, we very, very simply created this bit of mentality of, can we take this to the last week of the season? And the last week of the season, because of the games that got rearranged, we ended up playing Accrington away, Burton away, and then the final game of the season, Forest Green at home, within a Saturday week. And it was like, right, if we can get to that week in the race, we think we can do it. And that wasn't a disrespect to those teams. It was just creating a narrative that that's where we've got to get to. And then almost, if we get there, well, we'll do it, because that's what we've set around doing. And we managed to do that well. We had a big countdown at the training ground, days left, games left, training sessions left, points required. And every day we just kept changing the total. And at the bottom, it just said, take it to the final week. And we managed to do that. And then obviously we got to that last week, and that was a roller coaster in itself.
Yeah, I can imagine. Just go on then. Just talk us through that last week, and first of all, winning at Accrington, which was just an absolutely crucial game, because that was a crucial game for them as well, because that game effectively, I don't think it mathematically sent them down, but it did sort of effectively. So huge game for both teams as well.
Yeah, and you always have an unbelievable amount of sporting empathy for the opposition's team, managers, supporters, because how much goes into it. So that was certainly one side of the story that day. For us, it was an incredible result. George Thomas come off the bench, scored a brilliant goal. We won the game. It was a huge moment for us. But, this is where football is crazy, isn't it? While we're doing that, MK Dons are in a situation where I think they were 4-1 up in their game, and ended up, I think, drawing 4-4 on the day.
Yes, that's right.
And so that game could have looked so different, or the outcome at the end of that game could have looked so different. And almost our result and that result at the end of it gave us amazing confidence. I don't think it gave us complacency at all, but I felt like we'd got to this, let's get to the last week, and then we can do it. Then we won the first game of that final week. And the atmosphere in the dressing room wasn't one of, we've done it, but it was huge desire and drive and focus that we are going to do it. This is going our way. And there was a real confidence and momentum about us. And then obviously a few days later, we went to Burton. the penultimate game of the season, no one else was playing, which I actually don't think the fixtures should be allowed to fall like that. I don't think that's right for the competition.
Was it a postponed? Sorry, Mark. Was it a postponed game or something along those lines?
It was international break for Burton.
Right.
It got rearranged, but I'm not sure it should be allowed to be arranged as the only game that's penultimate when there's so much at stake. I always feel like teams should be playing at the same time at that period. But yeah, we didn't play very well. We lost the game. Burton were what they were, incredibly resilient team, very, very hard for you when you go there. You've seen it for years. Dino's teams always like it.
Yeah.
Never can you go into it thinking, oh, well, they're safe, so they'll just have a night off. That just wasn't their way. And actually that gave us confidence going into the last game of the season. We needed them to do us a favour against MK Dons. But we lost the game. And whilst the atmosphere after the Accrington game was, it feels like we're going to survive. That night at Burton, it felt like we were relegated because it went out of our hands. And on the last day of the season at Forest Green, we had to win, but we needed 2 results to go our way as well. Yeah. And we were confident we could win the game, but probably you can't say confidently that you're going to get 2 results go your way. And obviously the story of that last game was our game was a bit of a non-event. It was a win. It was comfortable. Forest Green were in a horrible moment. And so that was ticked off fairly early, and that was just playing for time in that game. And it felt like the longest second half of football I've ever watched or ever seen.
Sorry to interrupt at that point, Matt, but it's really interesting. You've kind of got to make sure that your players are focused on what the things that they can control, because while what's going out elsewhere is probably more important in a sense, you've also got to make sure that you do your job on the pitch and don't let anyone. But it's so hard. It's such a hard thing to manage, isn't it?
Yeah, because it only matters what's happening elsewhere if we do what we have to. And we had to readjust the mindset very quickly after Burton to say, lads, right, this isn't in our control anymore. But imagine how you'll feel Saturday if the other results go our way and we don't do our job. And that was almost the motivating factor of that will be the worst feeling you could ever experience in football. We have to win. We have to win. Get the job done. And we did it, and we were comfortable, and it felt like we'd won the game at half time. And the second half was a drag where every time the ball went out for play, players would ask someone in the crowd, what's the scores everywhere else? Like, the focus was mad. It was a crazy game. Forest Green didn't really have a real pressure on the game or push for the game at all. Really quiet stadium. No one watching the game, everyone watching their phones.
Wow.
Mad experience. And then in the Exeter game, they had about 14 minutes added time at the end. So we were waiting at full time, not knowing what had happened elsewhere. And it was absolute carnage. But when it finally happened, it was real good scenes. And actually, a group of players that have been at the club a long time didn't deserve to be remembered any other way after such a successful period. That's how many people's stories ended in the club. And it wrapped up an era of an incredible 3 or 4 years, incredible 3 years for us. And I think we deserved over the course in the end, with the resilience showed that we stayed in it. And of course, we needed others to do well. And Burton defended unbelievably that day.
Yeah.
I actually was at an EFL meeting about 6 weeks later, and I got up in the lift, and as I came out of the lift shaft, Dino Maria came out the shaft opposite, and he looked at me and went, "Where's my champagne?" And I
love Dino. He's brilliant. Oh, marvellous. Well, listen, I think that kind of wraps up an era with that group of players. I suppose I imagine the summer of 2023, you wanted to try and move things on, and you brought in a few players like Jack Stevens in goal, of course, and Ghassan Ahadmi as well. Was that a difficult summer as well, because you've got that core of players that were maybe coming towards the end, and I think a few of them left. But again, as always, resources are tight, and it's not always easy to get the right players in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was always going to be a tough summer because there was such a big change of either players that have been there a long time leaving for our decision, or players that we'd have loved to have kept that weren't going to stay and went on and earned better things and did other things. So we lost some big characters, we lost some big players, and that creates a big change. And at the same time, you think, right, how often can we keep being this team that plays like this? We have to try and evolve a little bit over time. We have to try to see if we can build a team that can have a little bit longer spells with possession of the ball, or have to see if we can move beyond the underdog tag gradually. It's hard to do that when your circumstances don't change too much and you've got to make so many changes to your team. So in the end, that usually is costly and is usually painful because it's got to go wrong before it goes right. And very, very challenging in order to do that. And at times we probably looked a little bit of a mix between the teams a bit this and a bit that, and lose a little bit of identity for what everyone's used to seeing. But I think it's just part of a process of trying to develop and change and improve. And I think anyone who's anywhere a long period of time has to change those things as you go along. Because if you're constantly low resource in the level, or you're constantly, let's just be the underdog and let's just play like this, I don't think that's sustainable for long. And I think the big step for us is try and stay at the level and build at the level and become a top half team quickly. And we were a little bit short of the resource and depth in the squad really to get to that point. And I think that showed any time that you're doing well, you want to be able to take people out and change people around. And if that ability isn't there, it's hard to maintain. And again, if you start the season really well, there's an expectation that after 5 games, if you're top of the league, which is absolutely ridiculous, by the way, that you should stay there because that's your level. And if you know about it, that isn't the level. That just isn't true. But you want to try to keep developing towards that. And you need real good depth and competition to do that. So that was difficult. And obviously decisions of mine that I'd have made wrong in terms of how to evolve the team and the style in little bits, and whether you can go all in at once or gradually get there. I just think it takes time and patience and understanding for that. But over long periods of time, I think people can get bored of the same thing, and sometimes change is what people need. So we tried to change the squad. We had to. We agreed in the summer. The target was very simple: stay in the league. We have to stay in it. Let's try and gradually improve. If we can have a season more like the season before last, that would be great. But obviously everyone wants that. That wasn't a pain-free season. It was just a nice season towards the end with some great memories in it. And it was a huge overachievement that season. So the target really was stay in the league. The desire really was, can we massively overachieve? And we felt we built a squad that was okay in terms of an open league, being able to be around the middle of it or the top end of the bottom half. My target really was to try and develop us into a top half team. This year was 16 wins. That would have got us to that position. 10 at home, 6 away, 14 clean sheets. This sounds negative, but a minus single digit figure of goal difference. We were minus 28 one year, minus 17 one year. If you finish in the minus digits, but it's single digits, you can still be a top half team. So all of those things were parameters we were trying to edge towards. One of the things we would need to do this year was draw more games. We hardly drew enough. We drew 5 in 19 this year before I left, and 7 over the whole season last year, but won most in the bottom 7 last year. So I felt we could always chip away at the wins, but having games and days where we scored points was really key. So how do we get towards that strategy? We agreed in the summer that it's going to be fairly short term. We're not going to be able to offer too many big contracts. Let's go for some real experience. Let's find as many players that have played the level to try and give us that consistency. I think we scored 8 clean sheets in the beginning period of the season, which was top in the country at one point. And then we had days where it was really bad, but at times you just got to bat them away and say that is the season. I mean, by definition, winning 16 is really tough, by the way, but we won. Let's just say you could win 16. That means you're not winning 30. And you have to therefore accept that when you lose some games, like, it's just actually part of the plan. Now, that's a really twisted way of looking at it, but it's a great way of staying calm and consistent and on plan of, no, this is where we're going to end up. So don't lose the plot when we lose some. And you can't choose the order. Like, if we'd have lost, if you lose games consecutively or you go on runs, it looks horrible. Whereas if you lose the same number of games, but they're sporadic and between wins, it doesn't feel as bad, even though the points total can be the same. So that whole emotional bit plays a big part in everything. But in recruiting the squad, we signed some very good players. We've probably found the market really difficult in that we've ended up signing lots of players over the time that are maybe at the older end of their careers or have got a bit of a checkered past with injuries. And if you have a smaller squad, and that's the case, that is going to hit you. And so the need to have a deeper squad really important. But that prime player market of signing those players at the top of their game just wasn't a market we could shop in, which was frustrating but understandable for where we were. And it was like 1 year strategy, let's get to the next step and gradually build. And there's a huge desire to do that at the club. As I said, they're in really good position and really ambitious and have got the investments to keep improving year on year. But we're coming from a low starting point. And so there's a lot to catch up on. But things definitely, I think, would learn from that period of time, and that others in the club will also learn from it. But at the same time, in the end, it's get the best you can with what you've got and try and get the best out of it. And in the main, we were. And in the end, we were a poor version of ourselves for a few too many games and a few too many results. And then what happens. But at the same time, I have absolutely no doubt that we would have been able to change that we would have been able to improve that with a good window and with time. Because in the end, we always found the solution one way or the other. And I'm sure we would have done again.
The policy of signing more experienced players for the level, I can completely understand, because you want players that you can sort of rely on, and that's been the sort of the hallmark of maybe what you've achieved over certainly those couple of seasons, and even staying up in your third full season. At the same time, there's also part of me that feels like sometimes you need younger players that have maybe got the energy to carry you through maybe a season when you do have that small squad. And secondly, if you want to increase the value of the squad in order to bridge the budgetary gap at the level, sometimes you need to develop saleable assets. And I would maybe look at that as something that maybe you as a coaching staff didn't do, maybe to the extent that you might have liked to have been able to done in order to achieve, I suppose, the sustainable progress. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But that's kind of the one thing. Is that a learning curve from your point of view in terms of being able to maybe develop one or two more players?
No, it's not a learning curve. It's just something that, you've got to decide whether something's possible or not. I think balance in the squad's really important. And there would be some examples of players that have done very well. What we were never able to do was monetize some really saleable assets. And actually, we had the opportunity to sell one or two, but turn them down over that period of time. So that could have looked a lot different. We decide in the years where we're struggling in January not to sell a couple of really important players. Now, we could have done that, and then people would say, oh, what a brilliant record of saleable assets they've got. And the Harry Darling story could have turned into a few others. But we decided to keep hold of players and not necessarily monetize those players. A lot of players that moved on at the end of their contracts, Kyle Noyle, Jack Iredale, Dimi Mitoff, Sam Smith, Harvey Nibbs, these players are assets that came in as younger players, developed with us, and have gone on to do really well. But because we never monetized that, one, because we either decided not to, or two, we could never get them on contracts long enough to really establish that value. That is just either decision to say, actually, we know the outcome is we might lose these for nothing. But if that's the circumstances, let's get the best out of them for 2 years. That is a decision. Obviously, everyone wants to create that saleable asset model, and you can do that with homegrown player like Liam Bennett or Harry Darling, as was, or there's others, Glenn McConnell there at the moment, Mamadou Jobe. Those boys are out on loan and will come good at some point. There are examples of that haven't come through yet. And then I think the final sort of part of that is just looking at clubs that have done that model unbelievably well. And those clubs, really, I think you look at Oxford, have done it amazing over the last few years. Sure. Peterborough do it amazingly well. But very, very often, those players that they end up selling weren't free transfers in the first part. They were players that had had some experience. They weren't 17. They were a little bit older. They'd been bought from non-league or Ireland or other places and been invested in. And having that pot to invest in, number one, players that can make your team better now, but people that can develop into assets is another part. And that is certainly a strategy we discussed a lot, and will be something, I think, for the future. But you have to deal in the moment of where you are. And when your strategy becomes a little bit more short-term of, we have to survive this year, it lends you towards a certain way. No question, in the future, to develop into the club that Cambridge wants to become, or many clubs want to become, that saleable asset bit is going to be the biggest way you can try and become a sustainable club and a model. So that is certainly something that will be looked towards. But it's no surprise to me that the first signing in the window, obviously positionally, was what it was, but it was an experienced player in a position, because in the end, you should know what you're going to get, and you should get a level of consistency from those people. So certainly this was a bit of a short-term season of lots of players on shorter contracts to try and see if we can just keep developing. But there needs to be a longer-term strategy to keep developing at the level, for sure.
Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. And I suppose this maybe feeds into what we talked about earlier, Mark, which is why there's a lot of more first-time managers now, because a first-time manager can go to the board with a sort of PowerPoint presentation on all the things that they want to do. But then it's only when you're actually in the job and you've got those pressures coming at you that you've got to make those decisions. And sometimes that involves a little bit of balance and not maybe being able to implement some of the ideas that you'd love to do idealistically.
Yeah, and look, I don't know. There is definitely a trend in that at the moment, but I also think there is a bad wave of almost negativity towards people of a certain age, and I almost feel that is getting that age is getting younger. And there's some amazing people that have been in the game years that are achieving every single year like unbelievable success in their clubs. There's currently some out of work that have had brilliant careers, and even though they might be out for a long period of time, they always end up back in, because you cannot put a price on that experience and that quality that they've obviously got. And so maybe in some cases for sporting directors and owners, it's easier to mold somebody doing it for the first time. But you have to be really, really careful as a head coach or a manager that you're not playing someone else's tune. It's got to be your way. And you've got to fit in line with a club's philosophy. But in the end, you'll be the one who's dispensed of if it isn't going well. And so as a manager, you have to be hard-nosed enough not to say, yeah, I'll do it like this, that, and the other. And actually, that might get you in the door, but it probably won't keep you there very long, because that's not the reality. And it's finding that balance all the way, that you've got to be your own person, doing it your own way, and you have to buy into a way that the club wants and work together. And if you can get that synergy and understanding from the start that this is how it is, this is how you'll be judged, and have that nailed, I think that's the key part.
Absolutely. Obviously, the Cambridge United board did choose to make a certain decision a few months ago, and I'm wondering, Mark, I imagine it's sort of a mix of feelings. On the one hand, I suppose the performances had dropped off for a certain number of games. Certain fans would use the word stale, but I also wonder if there's part of you that feels like a little bit let down as within that as well, because there's a feeling that you'd done such incredible work for Cambridge United in leading them to promotion your first full season in, taking them to comfortable survival in your second season in, staying up on the final day last season and staying up was still a great achievement that year. And you lost your job when the club was still outside the relegation zone as well. So do you feel a little bit let down?
No, I don't know if that's the right term. I mean, one thing I'd say, we try to buck a trend and show that loyalty is really important, and that to build something that's sustainable and longer term, you need to stick at it for a period of time. Last winter, 99% of clubs would have got rid of their manager, but actually it paid to stay with that. And so I thought that was a recipe that we could continue. There's clearly a fear that this is going the same way and surely it won't end in the right way. I understand that. And performances were bad. And stale's an easy word to use only because of timing. In any normal situation, if that was in the first month, you just say it weren't very good. And that's fair. But we weren't playing very well for a few games, and we lost a few games, and we hadn't got a real consistency in certain areas of the game. We were defensively a really strong team for a period, and then we had a time where we were conceding poor goals. We had a couple of heavy results in the local derby, which is never an easy one to take for everybody. Things like that definitely go even stronger against you. And if your dynamic of your team is slightly changing, and you're used to seeing something that's been very set for 3 years, it's very easy to just say, well, it doesn't look like that team, or it doesn't feel like that team. Well, no, because it isn't. And it's a different team that is developing and changing and trying to find a new way. And we would have found a new way, because that is what we do. So disappointed that it ends, but you understand it. That's just how it goes. Sometimes people get bored. Sometimes people give up on it. I think the difficult bit is that the basic assumption is, when someone says to you, not in these words, but if someone says to you, right, we have to survive and you're not going to help us, you're the problem, then obviously it's impossible not to take that personally, especially when you disagree with it. But it is football. Like 201 games as a first-time manager is fairly good, and it's always going to end somehow. Of course, your ego says, I'd love it to end on my terms, not somebody else's, and I'd love it to be successful the whole way through. But that isn't real life. And in a funny way, I hope I have 30 more years doing this, and it happens a number of times again, because that means that you're doing good jobs and you're always then going to get another one. And that's just the sort of the law of how it works. So I'm really delighted to have done the period I am, gutted that I'm not able to continue it. But I'm miles better for having done it. I'm miles better now than when I started. And someone along the line, if I'm lucky enough to get an opportunity somewhere, then someone else will benefit from that, and I'll be really energized to do it. And I love the club, always will, always have, will always be really interested in who does what and where it goes and if it continues. And that's a real sign of a legacy, I guess, whether things continue. But I know it's a lot better now than it was. But if I'm the manager of another team tomorrow and we play them, absolutely we'll be desperate to beat them, because that's the profession that we're in.
Absolutely, yeah. And listen, I think what an incredible chapter it's been, and I think the Cambridge United story. We'll come on to Mark Bonner, the manager, in the future in a moment. But just to sort of close off that chapter, I think you've left an absolutely phenomenal legacy there at Cambridge United, and not the ideal way to end, but I think that some of those memories, Newcastle winning promotion against Grimsby, stunning memories. And I've had a couple of messages from Cambridge fans just to thank you for what you've done for that football club. So just like to echo that, really. In terms of Mark Bonner, the manager, and going forward, what does the ideal next club look and feel like for you?
Well, I don't know if that exists, and I don't know if I'm certainly not in a position to just pick and choose where that is. I think in the end, you have an idea of what you'd love to try and pick up. And I'd love to get my teeth into something that has got stability about it. I think that's important. That has an environment you can work in every day to help get the best out of players. I think that the quality of the training facility and things in order to do your job and really help coach and develop players is really, really important for me. Obviously, I think anywhere you go, you want a chance of being successful. But the big thing for me is you've got to work with good people. You've got to work with people that you can build a relationship with, that you've got some synergy with, that you think you've got some time to make it work. And I don't assume that the next one will be 3.5, 4 years. That's fairly rare, But you want a chance to. It takes time to build and develop something, and that is a commodity that is very hard to find in football, I think. So. Yeah. Trying to find that would be ideal for me, but I'm in no rush to do that. I'm really enjoying this period at the moment, and if something comes my way that is the right thing, and I feel like I can make a difference at, and there is a team that I really want to work with, then I'm sure I'd like to take it. But in the meantime, you see some excellent managers out of work for a while. I'm open to pretty much anything and going anywhere, but it would have to feel right for me, and I would have to feel like I can build a connection and make a difference there. That would be the biggest thing for me, and hopefully by the time that comes around, I'll be fully energized and really ready to go and make a good go of it.
Yeah, let's hope that's the case. I'm curious to ask you, Mark. I mean, you've had a fantastic start to your managerial career with what you've achieved. At the same time, I feel like the game is getting stronger, and I suppose the challenge for any out-of-work manager is to come back and be even better than you were before. So, what are the things that you feel like you've taken from your time at Cambridge United that's going to feed into Mark Bonner 2.0, you might call it?
I think there's loads of things. I think a little bit of it is very quickly finding the solutions of how you're going to win games wherever you end up. And you go in with an idea of, I'd love the team to play like this, and I'd love it to be in this brand in this way. But the reality is, depending when you go in, the context of when you arrive, the resources you've got, the current squad, how they've been playing, how long they've been doing that. Sometimes it takes steps to get to that point, maybe. The fundamentals of a team of mine would be, I'd love to see that we can work incredibly hard, try and regain the ball as high up the pitch as possible, can be a very hard team to create chances against, and find a way of scoring goals and being an attacking threat in games and give people excitement. But the biggest thing I enjoyed about the team that we created to begin with at Cambridge is we created a connection where people loved playing in the team. People loved watching it. And if you can do that, I think there's many ways of that looking. But that would be my main aim. And there's a lot of lessons that I've learned that I will take with me, and some just won't fit somewhere else. And it's certainly a good experience that I've had, and look forward to putting some bits into play again somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure you'll continue to have a very successful career in management, Mark. So thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and all the best for the future.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.